First up I have Alberto, and I can kind of see the texture on this image a little bit. And what I would say from seeing this is just to paint in more variety, kind of lighter and darker areas. Right now it's looking just very even across everything, and yeah, just to give it, maybe under the eyes, or I'm not exactly sure what the texture is supposed to be, but thinking about how you might add some detail and variation. And you've turned in your Maya file, and I think this is the image you used to paint with in Mudbox, which is what you have in that Photoshop file, which is this image, but this is not the texture which would allow me to view it in Maya. If I go into your Maya file, I'm going to select the character, and I'll right mouse click here, two panes stacked, and click this button to graph materials on a selected object, and then double click here. It's this. You have it in your Mudbox folder. It's called TryMud U1 V1 TIFF. That file right there is what I would need to be able to see your texture in Maya, and you should take this file and put it into the source images directory of the project you're currently set to, so that it has the right kind of path here. So I can't really view your texture in Maya and kind of properly critique it, but from the image I saw, what I would say is, think about what you're going for, and then try to, get more variation and detail in there, and kind of show more sort of history and aging to the look of the texture. Next up, we've got Vincent, and character is looking pretty good. Got it open up in Maya, and when I reconnected the textures, I had this odd thing happen. So let's take a look at what's going on here. I'm going to double click on the material, and I can see that you've got the transparency connected, and I'm not sure if that was intentional or not. When I break that, the object shows up again, and I can see the texture in there. So I can repeat that for the mustache and the eyebrows. And I'm wondering if it's acting differently because you had it as a PNG file, but the ones you turned in are a JPEG. I'm not really sure. Maybe that's why. Maybe it worked in your file and not this one for that reason. I think this looks good. You can definitely see some, detail painted in the lips here, for example. And you can see some just, skin variation in the texture, and that looks good. You could probably even go further with it if you wanted to. I think it'd be good to do the same thing with the jacket, because right now it's just a solid blue, and the same with the pants are solid black. So you might want to take a look at the Photoshop file. When I look closely at this, it indeed looks like pretty much solid blue and solid black. So, just in the same way you've painted some variation in the skin color, you should do the same for this. And maybe you want to use like a fabric texture, but at least have some lighter areas and darker areas and that kind of thing, where you might see some wear on the fabric. Maybe painting some seams would be good, those kinds of things. So it's good. I think it could be better on the clothing, but yeah, good work. Okay, next up is Cindy, and from this image, yeah, it's good that you've got the different areas painted, the white and black, and it seems like there's some variation on the feet, so sort of darker and lighter areas, which is good. It might be nice to see some of that on the beak, and then overall it'd be good to have some texture painted. So right now it just looks like, for the most part, it looks like just two solid colors, and I think it might be nice to have some texture that kind of hints at feathers. Not that you would want to paint out feathers, but just enough texture to kind of suggest them. I think you could paint a little more detail on the eye here, maybe a pupil, and yeah, just go a little further with it. To be able to see these in Maya, what I would need is this file that's been mapped to it, which is this out uv.jpg, which is in your source images directory. So that's what we'd be looking for, and then I could actually critique it thoroughly in Maya. So yeah, I would say you could keep going with it. You know, add a little bit more, you know, texture and variation to the various fields of color you've got going right now. Next up is Sungjung, and we've got this rabbit, and you can see a lot of nice fur texture in there. Let's take a look in Maya. So yeah, this is looking good. There's, you know, you get pretty close, and there's the detail holds up nicely, which is good. And you've got the pink in the ear. You might want to paint a little bit of variation there because it looks maybe a little too solidly pink. And maybe do a little more blending between here and there. You might want to look at the Photoshop file for. So here's the Photoshop file, and yeah, I mean, you can kind of see right here how that's stretched, and there's some funny blending stuff. So if you haven't been working in this file and you weren't able to get what you wanted out of Mudbox, you could just jump in here and, you know, just sort of clone stamp. I mean, I could even, you know, you probably have the actual source texture somewhere, but I could even just sort of clone stamp from here, and you know, like, that's not ideal, but you kind of get the idea. Like, you could paint in here and kind of clean. Oops. Let me just sample that again. Sort of clean that up so it blends nicer, and you don't have to do everything in Mudbox, I guess is the point, because sometimes if you're not getting the results you want, and so that would look you know, much nicer, I think, with the way the fur is blended into the pink. And then you could, you know, make the pink lighter and darker in certain areas rather than being just a solid color. But overall, yeah, this is really good work. I think that another tip is, if you want to take this to the next level, is on the, I actually could save this and then go into the Hypershade and double click here and reload the texture, and we should see that update. Yeah, you see that on the ear, how that looks a little nicer. You know, if I went too far into the pink, you could always paint back some of that, but the idea is it looks cleaner and we don't have that sort of stretching you had along there before. The other thing is, you know, you have this as a Phong, which is fine, but it looks very shiny right now, and that's this, you know, the specular color right here, which I just, you know, dragged it down, and to me that already looks better. But the other thing you can do is you can paint specular color, where certain areas, you know, can be shiny and certain areas can be matte, and you can get that sort of variation going in there, which sometimes looks good. And you can even start, for example, you know, just for fun with the actual map you have right now. So if I were to take this and just drag this the fur to the specular color, well, that's too much. But yeah, that's much too bright. But the idea is you could use the variation from the original file and adjust that. I mean, I guess what I could do is I could bring in a new file, create 2D texture file, and then I would just I'm just going to copy that and then paste that here, and then map this one to the specular, but then go into here, into this file, and play with like color balance or effects or something. Yeah, so you can sort of turn the whole thing down there, that color gain. And what I've got now is sort of a variation of kind of like a little bit of shininess, but it's variation. Let's turn it all the way down. So that's none. And then you're seeing like just a little bit kind of spread out on certain areas, sort of where the lighter fur is. It kind of gives it a little bit of a nicer look. So a little bit of shine. Probably keep it pretty subtle. Mostly matte with just a touch of shine here and there. But I guess the next level will be to say, okay, where would the fur look shinier than others, and then go in and paint that where white would be the shiniest and black would be, a matte color. But what I did was just sort of a quick shortcut to get some variety based on the texture that you'd already painted. But yeah, this is very good work. Next up is Damien. We've got an image here in the texture map, which is good. Let's take a look in Maya. So yeah, you've got the sort of colors laid out in the right places, and there's a little variation here painted there. I can see you've painted an eyebrow. I think this could be a little cleaned up here and have some more, detail in it for the eye, and kind of more variation on the lips and the skin tone. Start getting maybe some scratches and some more kind of sense of construction history, meaning like whether it's bolts or screws or seams or welds, just a sense of how this thing is put together. And then same on the clothing, some seams and some fabric texture, some wear tear on the leather belt, those kinds of things. So I think that, yes, you got the colors laid out. You asked a question here about should you separate that model into different objects based on materials? And yeah, that would be how it's done. And at the very least, you would separate, these objects. So you would have them separated into the objects that are, that are not one big seamless object for sure. And then you definitely do not want those combined into one object. I think I mentioned that in the previous video critique of this model, but maybe not. I thought I did. But yeah, and so then you can, and that means also you could have a separate UV map for each of these, so you'd have like lots of resolution to work with on those. And you could do the same shirt, pants, arm pieces, head. Those could all be separate if you would like as well. So that you're not taking, you're not having to share the one map for the whole body. So that's definitely a way to go with this. So, and I think for the textures you have, you've got some basic layout. I think that what I'd like to see is some detail in the texture, some variation, some, some fabric texture, some skin tone variation, and like I mentioned, construction history, things like seams and welds or those kinds of things that make them feel like more real objects. Next up is Brittany. And yeah, this is looking pretty good. And this, I think, I've said on a lot of other people's pieces who had just sort of a solid color for their clothing. This is a really nice example of having some pretty good fabric texture. It may be scaled a little bit big, but I think it works pretty well. I think there's some nice look at the eyes, some really nice work there on the detail in the eyes. That looks great. It might be from a photo, which is fine. I think it'd be nice to get that same sort of level of detail going in the hair, so you might want to get some hair. And I can see some variation in the skin, like these kind of rosier cheeks, and you painted the lips. I think you could go further and get, I don't know, things like freckles or maybe some darker areas around the eyes, and just kind of vary it up a little bit. Definitely think the hair needs some love. That's sort of standing out to me. Maybe a little bit more on the shoes, a little bit lighter, and get some variation going there. But the clothing looks really good. And the eyes look great, and yeah. So if you could up the hair especially, and the shoes, and then maybe go a little further on the skin, this would be great. So yeah, good work on this one. Oh, and you mentioned here, I wasn't sure whether I should upload a zip with my files, and actually, there's actually an easy way to make sure you have all the correct files, which is if you go File, Archive Scene, what it's going to do is, I'm not going to actually do it, but it's going to save all the files you need. Actually, you can see right here, it saved it as a zip file. So, and then that'll include the, obviously. Next up I have Tommy. Let's take a look at that one. So this one doesn't actually have any textures painted. It's just solid colors have been assigned to the various areas. Also, the model is not complete. I mentioned in the previous critique that you're going to want to add some thickness to the edges of the clothing here, and I demonstrated how to do that. Also, this character is not centered on the origin, and the head is not centered relative to the rest of the clothes and body. If you look at this, the center line of this clothing is here, and the center line of the head and body is there. So we'll want to fix those things. I'm going to group it, and I did Control G for group. I'll go W for move mode, hold down D and V and middle mouse drag to snap the pivot point to the center of the character. I'll click the X axis and hold down X and middle mouse drag to get that to the center, and then I'll move it up and make sure that the feet are on the ground. And then I need to take these surfaces and get them to be centered as well. And then these two sides are separate right now, so we're going to want to fix that. But right now the center edge isn't centered, so I'm going to right mouse click, go to edge, double click to get that edge loop. And then make sure I don't have this this mouth included, so I'm just control selecting that. Oh, and this other area here, so we just want that part along the very center and not those other areas. And then I'm going to change this to absolute transform and type 0, enter, and we should see that go to the center line, and then I'll repeat that for this other side. So get the edge, double click along the center, make sure I don't have these mouth edges. I use Control Select for those, and these other edges here. Okay, just the center line, and again 0, enter, and that cuts those exactly along the center line. Now that I've done that, I'll select these two objects. Whoops, object mode, mesh, combine, and then I need to merge the vertices, so vertex, and I can actually, theoretically I just need to select along the center line, but it's only going to merge vertices that are right on top of each other with the default setting, so I can just go to Edit Mesh, Merge Components, and in the options, as long as this is set to 0.01, it'll only merge the two that are right on top of each other, and so I can merge. And now we can see this is a seamless head. So while we're talking about the model, besides adding some thickness here and probably some more detail and shape to the mouth and nose area, you'll also want to work on the hand a little bit more. You need more detail. You might want to lengthen these fingers some and add more detail at the joints to be able to bend those once you put the hand joints in. I'm going to do Shift, right mouse click, and soften edge to get that smoother look. And so yeah, some modeling things to fix, and essentially this has not been textured yet. You have colors on it, but the assignment was to paint textures, so you'll need to go ahead and do that. Next up is Huao, who's had a number of issues with the model coming into Mudbox, and so let's take a look at. So first of all, before we start troubleshooting this model is nowhere near complete. It is not yet at a state where you should be moving on to things like UV mapping and texturing. There's way too little detail in the arms and legs. There's no hands or feet or paws or anything like that been modeled. You need more detail around the mouth and definition on the lips, more around the eyes and eyelids. This is not ready to be UV mapped and textured. So the first step is to kind of really work on the model and complete the model before going to other steps. I can see some interesting issues going on here. Looks like you've got some overlapping faces here, which may or may not have anything to do with the problems you were having with Mudbox, but it's a bit of an area of concern. Just kind of checking things around here, see if I see anything odd. And let's, first of all, I'm going to delete history on the object, because, let's separate the object mesh, separate, because you do not want to combine the eyes and the body. I don't know why anybody would do that. And let's delete history on this, delete by type history. And I don't see any very obvious problems with the model just by looking at it here as far as why it wouldn't work in Mudbox. There is a tool to clean up your mesh, which is Mesh Cleanup. And what I would do is just run it several times. So I'm going to start with just the default. I did edit, reset, and I'll apply that. And then I'll start adding options. So let's just add them one at a time. And so I can see it did collapse an edge here. And when I was playing with this before, I did get a problem when I tried to do that. So that gives me a hint that there could be some faces with zero area. Another way to kind of help troubleshoot your model is if we go to Display, Polygons, and turn on Face Centers. And if you see one of these dots that is along an edge rather than in the center of a face, that would give you a hint that you had some kind of extrude that wasn't moved afterwards. But I'm not seeing that right now. And then the other major issue, besides, like I said at the beginning, you're not ready for this step because this model needs to be complete, but is the UV map. If we look at these side by sides and go panel UV texture editor, this does not have a properly laid out UV map. This is just the cube UV map that it started from. There is no UV mapping here, so you need to go through and slice it and unfold it and go through that whole process before you can go to Mudbox. So it makes sense that Mudbox wouldn't use this model because it has a UV map. So first step is to go back and complete the model and really spend a lot more time on the model. Then do the proper UV mapping, cut the edges and unfold and lay out, then bring it into Mudbox. But don't try to bring it into Mudbox in its current state because it's not ready. At this point, you might want to consider using a stock model because you're enough modules behind that it's going to be very difficult to catch up. So it's not impossible if you want to really put in the hours to fix this model, but just to be able to continue in the course, I can attach a stock model that you can use.